Our gospel reading today is taken from the Gospel according to Mark at chapter 1 and verses 29 through 39. Listen to what the Spirit might speak into your circumstances and into your life today in this reading from the Gospel of Mark. As soon as they left the synagogue, they entered the house of Simon and Andrew with James and John. Now Simon's mother-in-law was in bed with a fever, and they told him about her at once. He came and took her by the hand and lifted her up. Then the fever left her, and she began to serve them. That evening at sundown, they brought to him all who were sick or possessed with demons, and the whole city was gathered around the door. And he cured many who were sick with various diseases, and he cast out many demons. And he would not permit the demons to speak, because they knew him. In the morning, while it was still very dark, he got up and went out to a deserted place, and there he prayed. And Simon and his companions hunted for him. When they found him, they said to him, "Everyone is searching for you." He answered, "Let us go on to the neighboring towns, so that I may proclaim the message there also, for that is what I came out to do." And he went throughout Galilee, proclaiming the message in their synagogues and casting out demons. May God bless to our understanding this reading from God's holy word, and to God's name be glory and praise. You know, sitting behind the pulpit, I can't see. Did he wear the sunglasses? Okay. God gives power to the faint, Isaiah says, and strengthens the powerless. We all get tired, even youths get tired and faint, they grow weary, but those who wait on the Lord will renew their strength. They'll rise up on wings like eagles. These words are often heard at funerals for some reason. And the hymn we just sang about eagles' wings, if you don't know, is the quintessential funeral hymn. You hear it here in Pittsburgh at many, many funerals, perhaps most funerals. Its lyrics are taken straight from Psalm 91, and they're not all very relatable. I mean, the snare of the fowler, what does that mean? And 1,000 falling at your right hand, that doesn't happen very often. And yet people mumble through the verses in order to get to the beautiful refrain of that song. And he will lift you up on eagle's wings. You know, Protestants kept hearing this song at the funerals of their Catholic friends. And so they started asking for it at their own funerals because they liked it so much. And so we used to have to rent the song for every funeral and purchase temporary rights to it, print the words in the bulletin until we got the new hymnal, which actually has it in it. Because it speaks to people's hearts. Maybe not the verses, but the refrain really speaks to people's hearts. What is it about this image of soaring with the eagles that speaks to us, especially at times of transition and loss and pain and suffering? What is it about being up there with an eagle or like an eagle that calls out to us? Is it maybe the idea of looking down on our world and our life with a sense of clarity, perspective, the bigger picture? Is it maybe just the idea of soaring above the fray of the daily grind? You know, I've heard this, and maybe it's this. I've heard that eagles don't need to use their muscles at all while they're soaring. The wind holds their wings open, and they just go. Eagles are the only birds that soar into storms because they love it. The wind just carries them, and they go. I don't know if that's a scientific fact, but it's a nice thought. They relax their shoulders, they let the currents carry them, and they go. We all need to do that sometimes, don't we? We all need to soar. We all need to drift. Even Jesus sought out a quiet place to go to be alone and to pray amid the fray. We get tired, and we need to seek renewal. That's what I was doing. In fact, that's what I do at least once a week and every summer. That's what Sabbath is. In the summer of 2021, I've told you before, I took some of my continuing education time to cross the Allegheny National Forest, which is about 100 miles from north to south, not including the extra mile that I added to the trip by hiking up to New York State and then back down, just so that I could go the whole way from the border, 100 miles south. I have a long and affectionate history with that forest. I spent 3.5 beautiful years living in its shade, exploring its trails, its ridges, its streams and valleys. It was a time of enormous healing in my life. And so 11 years later, back in 2021, I wanted to go back and revisit a place that to me was a sacred place. It was a kind of pilgrimage. Do you have a place like that? Or do you remember a place like that that could kind of heal you? 5 days and 50 miles into the woods, I met a friend on the banks of Tynesta Creek, and he lent me his kayak to finish the rest of the journey, the next 50 miles, on the water. It was there for the first time that I shared my daily life with eagles, bald eagles, flying above the stream. It was glorious to let the currents carry me south through those woodlands, dark and fragrant. Sometimes the water went from deep and slow to white and fast, and you would always hear the rapids coming before you saw them, and it added just enough excitement to an otherwise very restful trip. It was sweetly hypnotic to walk or paddle all day long, make camp, sleep, and then do the same thing again for 8 days. You see so much of the world when you're going slow. You see so much more of the world when you take time to walk or do it slowly. And what is it about being middle-aged and liking birds? I mean, seriously, you don't notice a bird until you hit 40, and then suddenly birds are amazing. Suddenly you're noticing the birds. When you're a kid, the only bird you could identify might be a bald eagle, though you never saw one, or a cardinal or a robin, but you didn't care about them. The birds were wonderful on that trip. The wood thrushes ushered in the darkness every evening with their beautiful flute-like evening song, which is not the same as their morning song. And they're homely, they're not pretty, they're little brown birds with beautiful voices. And if the wood thrush is the voice of the evening, then the great horned owl is the voice of the night with its haunting call, hoo, 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 hoo. It's a beautiful bird. But the greatest honor of all was to be accompanied by a pair of bald eagles who followed my boat for 50 miles down that river. Each day, 2 friendly eagles would get up and join me for my journey. The wood ducks and the mergansers did not like them. They did not welcome them one little bit. Oh, I forgot to mention the mergansers. Those are red-headed wild ducks who would float alongside me in companionable silence. And they didn't like the eagles. The eagles were doing the same thing I was, really. They were just floating on the air on the current as I floated on the water on the current. And their presence somehow made me feel chosen. Like, wow, you guys could be floating everywhere and you choose to fly above my boat? Does it look like a big fish? All the birds made such welcoming companions on that trip. And those eagles, they seemed almost to be watching over my boat. I know they weren't. They were just fishing. I had gone to the woods to be alone, but in solitude, like Jesus in the wilderness in the first chapter of Mark, I enjoyed communion with the wild beasts, some of whom with feathers sang or floated or soared on the currents around me. When we slow down, when we really slow down and look around, we discover our connectedness to the living world around us. We are created for communion with each other, with God, and somehow even with the birds, as crazy as it sounds. Community restores us. They shall mount up on wings like eagles. They shall renew their strength. Now, you know, Isaiah is a very long book, but maybe you don't know, or maybe you do, that the prophet Isaiah himself only wrote the first 39 chapters of the book that bears his name. And here we are in chapter 40, right where he left off. Isaiah predicted a great national calamity, a great national trauma for his people. They would be conquered. They would be kidnapped. They would be taken from their home place into a far-off place, Babylon. Isaiah himself probably died in exile, or else maybe during the siege of Jerusalem. And here in chapter 40, one of Isaiah's disciples takes pen in hand to comfort those who have survived and who have been kidnapped and who are now living against their wills in a faraway place. Their whole identity has been stolen. And without identity, what meaning does life have? It didn't matter who you were back home. Here in exile, you're nobody. You're just an exile. All you do is sit there. Their captors thought that everyone should be Babylonian. They were cultural imperialists. They wanted everyone to speak their language and worship their gods. And so they would kidnap people, especially the upper class people, the intelligentsia, knowing that within a few generations, those people's languages and customs would fade, and they would be Babylonian. It worked just partly in this case, and that is why Jesus spoke Aramaic and not Hebrew, because Hebrew ceased to be the language of the people because of that captivity. And Isaiah 40 speaks tender comfort into a season of immense trauma and dislocation, a season of loss of identity, of loss of meaning. You know, it's no wonder we like to hear these words at funerals. They were written for a time of great grief. Have you not known? Have you not heard? God gives power to the weak. They rise up on wings like eagles. Exile. Exile. We are living in an age of exile. People today are cut off from many of the good things that create identity and meaning in our lives. And if they don't find their identity and their meaning in good and healthy places, they will turn to ugly places to find identity and meaning and a group. I mean, really, think about this. What is your identity? If you were to tell a visitor from another planet who you are, what would you say? What is your identity? What gives your life meaning? Is it not some connection to a bigger group, to a group bigger than yourself? Is it not connectivity that gives us a sense of place in this world? Connection to the earth, connection to our history, connection to each other, connection to God. I say this as a lifelong introvert. My record as an introvert is unassailable, albeit a high-functioning introvert. Community is what creates for us a sense of who we are. It gives us meaning for our lives. This thing of belonging to a group, something bigger than ourselves, something we can point to. Community is exactly the thing that suffers with our modern lifestyles, these fast-paced, wealth-oriented, individualistic lives that we live in front of our computer screens and our telephones. We think we're so connected and tied in with each other. Zoom is great. Social media is wonderful. I abuse them both as much as you do. But in a way, don't they defeat their own purpose? Don't they kind of undermine the connections that they're trying to create? For they keep us from actually coming together and knowing each other. And believe me, you can be whoever you want on the internet. You can be anybody on the internet. We don't know each other. And when we don't know each other, we don't know ourselves. And we begin to fear others who are not like us. I just discovered a few days ago the wonderful book Wintering by British author Catherine May. And in this book, Catherine May reminds us that winter used to be a time to go dormant and to regenerate, at least in our northern hemisphere. It was a time to hole up. It was a time to eat the canned goods that you put aside back in the summer. It was a time to celebrate the big celebrations like Christmas. It was a time to live off the summer's bounty. It was a time to be in close quarters with the people you care about the most. And she bemoans the fact that most people in England no longer belong to religious congregations. For as she says, the world needs congregations now more than ever. She's right, isn't she? Exactly the thing we need is exactly the thing that we turn away from with these limited lives of ours, these busy lives. This is the genius of groups like Alcoholics Anonymous. They understand that everyone needs to find their people. Absolutely everyone. Even if all you do is sit on the edge of that group and listen to the proceedings. Being together with others matters to us. It's the kind of animal we are. Identity and meaning are bestowed by communities. You can go on Reddit and be whoever you want, but in reality, it's your community that makes you who you are. Let me venture a guess. You're tired. We are so tired these days. We are worn out, and we don't want to admit it because we can't really pinpoint a good reason for it. We don't have an excuse. We're just worn out these days. Too much stimulation, too much electric light, I don't know. Too much news, not enough wintering. I don't know if I've ever wintered. Too much of some things and too little of others. Like the folks when Isaiah 40 was written, we're all feeling a sense of collective trauma. And it's all the worse for not having a name. If it had a name, we could say, oh, it's because of this. But it doesn't have a name, so we have nothing to blame. We just all feel it, and we live with it. And we go on living with it. We're tired. Tired people turn away from each other. Tired people seek their own well-being and rest. Tired people turn away, deepening their estrangement and cutting off their sources for identity and meaning. No wonder we find this image of the soaring eagle so powerful and so moving, especially at times of alienation and loss. Look at that eagle up there with its clarity on the world, with its perspective, with its freedom. We live in an age of heartbreaking loneliness. Togetherness is messy. I know it is. Churches hurt people sometimes. Congregations can do damage in people's lives. Togetherness is messy and it's complicated. But people are dying for lack of it. They call it deaths of despair. We need each other. Communities, I know, they entail gossip, they entail rivalries, they entail jealousies, though I have seen very little of that in this congregation, I must say. They're messy, but they also heal people and build character and educate and inspire. You hold truths that I need to hear. I might have a few virtues that might do you some good. There's a wisdom in the collective that we cannot attain on our own. We need to find ways to start coming back together in messy, intentional community, in congregations, as an antidote to our 21st century malaise. You know, since the 1970s, we've been practicing the ethic of putting ourselves first, the me generation, looking out for number one. And there was some wisdom in that. I mean, really, you can't love anybody else until you've loved yourself. But we have overdone it. I think it's time to come out of it. We've overdone it, and now we're lonely. I think we need to start turning as much as we can from the I to the we, from the me to the us. And so here's your homework for this week. Do something every day to build community for yourself and for those around you. Turn away from the easy conveniences of computers and cars and phones, and instead actually spend time with another individual. Get to know them. Learn to love them. Work with them for a better world. Maybe make a friend of someone who's not the same age as you. Strike up a conversation with someone whose first language is not English. Be in relationship with someone of a different social class, a different race. You've made the first step, actually, by gathering for worship. And that is a big step. Whether you're gathering online or in person, community is hard for some people when you can't get out of your home. But you've brought your life's shared and private worries and fears together to set them before the God of all people. That's community. Isolation is easy. Isolation is the default these days, and it is killing us. It is harming us. And we are so built for togetherness that even introverts will seek a sense of community with the birds on the river when they're alone, which might not be a bad place to look. God will renew their strength. They will rise up on wings like eagles. Community is messy, but they say that the eagles rest their wings while they're flying in the storm. Amen.